Rappin with ReefBum is sponsored by Bulk Reef Supply and Ecotech Marine.
Hey, what's happening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Rappin with ReefBum. I'm your host, Keith Berkelhamer. So today on the live stream, I welcome Tim Kelley, who owns Purple Monster Corals. I love that name, Tim. Purple Monster Corals is a coral export business in the Solomon Islands. What's happening, man? I guess you had a little technical difficulties in your end. The power company wasn't cooperating.
Yeah, they never do, and they always choose the best, as in most inopportune times, to just shut the power off. So we sorted it out.
Yeah, no, I'm glad I'm glad we got you and you figured it out on your end. Before we start chatting with Tim, I do want to thank the sponsors for the show, both Bulk Reef Supply and Ecotech Marine. Really appreciate them supporting the show, and I also appreciate all you folks out there tuning in and watching. Please hit that like button if you haven't done so already, and yeah, so more people can find the stream. And as usual, always encourage you to ask questions, post your comments in the chat. So Tim, man, you have a very interesting background as a diver, coral collector in the Solomon Islands. You used to work for Triton, you know, as well as Unique Corals in the Solomon Islands. Can you kind of give everybody a background in your history there?
Sure. Let's see. So I worked for fish stores all my life. You know, going through high school, I worked at fish stores, managed fish store, and then I eventually ended up at Vivid Aquariums when it was like on the bleeding edge of internet coral sales, and did retail for them, and then used that as an inroads to work at the wholesale 104th Street. It's not quite the 104th Street it was, say, a decade or two back, but it's still, there's still several business there. So got in 104th Street and managed Pacific Aqua Farms for a bit under Dave Palmer, and maybe a year in, he had asked me to come out to the Solomons to consult on just sort of figure out where the weaknesses were in the business out here. And I fell in love with the place. And so came back out here after that. I worked for SDC, went to the Marshall Islands. That was an experience. Deep water fish collecting, diving to 150, 200 feet twice a day, catching, multicolor angels and multicolor angels, Helfrich's firefish, mystery wrasses, stuff like that. And then after that, went back to servicing. Serviced Malibu in that area for almost a decade. And then went to work for actually it was through Jake. Jake really actually made the connection to Triton. He put me on Eson's radar, and Eson put me in contact with Joe of Unique Corals, and we did Triton. Basically, I did the dry goods side in Triton and helped develop that. And then came back out here in 2015 while I was servicing. Came back out with Jake to go find Purple Monster, and that's actually why I chose the name of the business, was sort of honoring that that expedition we did and sort of that adventure. And I just want to keep that sort of sense of adventure about the corals out here. And it's kind of one of the least developed or least explored places, reef wise or reef hobbyist, diver wise. And sort of highlight the exploration side of what we're doing here. So came back out here in 2015, and then in 2018 was looking to start a business out here. So the old business under Dave Palmer had shut down, and there was a space for it. So that was what got me out here.
How challenging is it to start a business in the Solomon Islands, man? That's got to be kind of a to be an entrepreneur in a foreign country and one like the Solomon Islands. I'm sure it's a lot of hurdles.
Oh man. Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's an incredibly difficult place to be entrepreneurial. There's no pathway whatsoever. You really just have to sort of come in and maybe I'm lacking the verbiage for it, but just a stupid level of tenacity and just not giving up even when you're getting these just like hits after hits. I mean, survived through COVID. Didn't give up during COVID when we couldn't export for a year and a half. It was just the business was just a money sink for a year and a half. And I think a lot of people would have just said, cool, you gave it a best shot. And it was like, no, this is what I've got. We're going to make this work. So the level of tenacity required is crazy. So I think anybody in the business who has a business here would say you have to have a really good sense of humor, because sometimes you just get hit with goofy stuff like today, the power shut off. No explanation why, no reason why. There's nothing broken. It's just off.
So there's no website you can go to for the power company to see the status of an outage.
No. And I was saying off air how power is 4 times the price of anywhere else in the in the world, or at least 4 times the price in the United States. It's the most expensive in the South Pacific, and I believe the world, in fact. And there's no caring about ratepayers or anything. It's just it's off. Deal with it. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, I mean, in terms of just the hobby itself, in terms of reef keeping, you have to have a lot of patience. You have to have, you got to, really kind of slug through a lot of things that don't go your way. And I can also, imagine just it gets multiplied 10 times, doing what you're doing over there. Take us through, exactly what a coral exporter is. Kind of like what's a day in the life of a coral exporter, and how do you, manage your clients on the other end of the globe?
Sure. So it's, there's not like a manual, right? So it kind of is one of those businesses as you define it, right? It's not like there's 50 guys or 50 people in the world doing this. We're all kind of our own entrepreneurs, sort of paving our own path. But I wouldn't have been able to do it if I hadn't already come out and seen the corals from an existing. So the real trailblazer would be Dave Palmer. I mean, he was out here in 1992, and he's got stories and stories and stories. I hope you have him on, because the guy has crazy stories. But so he really largely blazed the trail. So I'm sort of picking up pieces of the pieces I like. I'm not a fish collector, and so fish collecting is kind of fallen by the wayside. A lot of people do fish in my role. So managing customers, it's hard. It's only actually like in the days of no email and only, long distance cable to cable phone communication. I don't know how they did it. Having email, when I was here in 2015 or 2008, good luck loading a web page. It could take 10 minutes just to get a web page up. So getting an email out, really difficult, let alone sending photos. Now people are asking for, WYSIWYG on all the corals that you send them. I mean, the amount of data and information that can be traded, we're live Skyping in my neighborhood now, which is crazy. Even in 2018, when I first moved here, the best option for data like this was to have a big basically a microwave dish that pointed to a tall building in town where they would broadcast from a satellite dish that they had. It was during COVID that they put a fiber optic cable and actually sort of like brought Haniara into having actual like data rates so we can do this. But yeah, this would have been impossible just a few years ago. So keeping in contact, it's hard. It's hard being a one-man show. I'm the diver, I'm the packing team, I'm the, interfacing with customers, I'm doing banking, I'm doing, management of employees and training. So I wear a lot of hats, and it's hard sometimes keeping in track of customers. And honestly, I think if there's communication is probably my weakest point, to be completely clear. So that's something that I'm still working on. Is that hammering? Are you hearing that?
That's cool, man. You're in the field there, so it kind of adds to the effect, I think. That's cool.
Okay.
So I mean, how often, like how many days out of the week would you actually go out and do some collecting?
Ideally, it's not as much as I'd like. I mean, the diving is where I get personal enjoyment out of this. Like my happiest place, right? My happy place is diving, is being underwater and collecting. And it's less fun when it's for work. Anytime you turn your work into your career, you commoditize your hobby. But diving is what I enjoy the most. I probably get 2 days on a good week, 2 days underwater on a good week. Typically that's, 2 to 3 dives a day. If it's shallow, they're longer. If it's, if we're collecting locanis, we're talking 45 minutes underwater, come up for an hour, 45 minutes under again. But that's 2 days a week. It would be more given in my ideal situation, this time next year, I'll be out 5 days a week. When I first got out here in 2018 as a consultant, I basically lived with the 2 full-time divers, and I'd be out 5 days a week. We'd catch our own fish. We'd live out on a little island for a couple days at a time, Come back in with our haul, then go right back out there. And then we were only home Saturday and Sunday to sort of like re-gear up for the next week. I loved that. That was really life-changing. So.
Wow. So what kind of, are you basically collecting stony corals? Is that your focus?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, stony corals, and then collecting corals like wild coral, and then collecting broodstock for farming. So, trying to, it's one thing to find a really cool coral. It's another thing to be able to go back and get it repeatedly. If a coral is rare, if corals at this point in the market, as I see it, if a coral is interesting, it's because it's rare and no one's ever seen it before. And if it's rare for me, there's probably not a whole lot of it. And if I see a 1 in 1,000 corals, it'd be nice if I can, send a good amount to a customer, and then, 6 months later, a year from now, be able to collect more. So I think, Purple Monster would be a good example of that. I found some, and now we're able to start producing it so it could be a more repeatable experience. So it's not something that only ever, it was 7 years ago was the last time that we collected some. I don't want it to be another 7 years before we collect more of it.
So you just found some more Purple Monster. You found it 7 years ago, and last week.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, wow.
Last week.
And so, very interesting. I love the Purple Monster. I mean, I actually have the original.
I saw the article
Tyree
on
Purple
it.
Monster.
I saw the article. I was really happy about that. Yeah.
And I'm starting to been propagating and starting to spread around. It's a tough one, man. Obviously you're very much well aware of it, but I had it a number of years ago, in an old tank in Connecticut, where I used to live, and it just grew really, really well for me. I had it under metal halides, and it.
How was the flow?
Flow was good.
How was the
flow? Was good.
Okay.
And
what I'm seeing in situ everywhere where I've seen it. And if there was a time where I was the only show in town, and I would probably be a little more liberal with where I'm finding it. But where I am seeing it, flow is not crazy. It's not a It's an obscure little niche environment where it likes to be, and it's not there with the, where you're finding robusta, things that are fighting against waves, things that are propping themselves up against wave action. It's not going to be there, and it's not going to be where you're seeing, fast growing stuff like Millipora. It's in its own little niche environment, but it likes a lot of light, doesn't like a lot of flow.
Interesting, yeah. So, because now the piece that I have now, I've got it both under halides and LEDs in another system, and there is a decent amount of flow in that in those tanks, and it's not the same kind of growth that I had years and years ago. So I wonder, because go ahead.
I'd be inclined to think it likes halides a lot more too. It likes that warm yellowy light. It's purple. It doesn't show off well under blue lights. It really doesn't. It doesn't have that. It's a reflective pigment, not a fluorescent pigment. And like most purple things, but this one in particular, in shallow water, it's rich purple and looks healthy as can be. You might get a little green fluorescence,
yes.
But Yeah, metal halide type light, shallow water.
Yeah, it is really something that is a challenge because I've grown a piece from a frag. It's been a few years. I've been growing it out as a frag, and maybe now it's a 4-inch mini colony that I have. But it grew very well for me under metal halides a number of years ago. But I also ran those halides on magnetic ballast, and now I have electronic ballast. So I wonder if that also has something to do with it or not. I think the par was probably higher when I had the better growth on it. But that's cool, man. So what does this mean for the marketplace? I mean, if you found it again, how long do you think it would take you to export that coral?
I mean, I think it's tough. So I would say it's, as a slow grower, even oceanic, it's a slow grower. It's going to be at least 6 months before we're seeing any sort of mariculture trickle out. But I don't want to, dangle it like a carrot either. That's not fair to customers either, right?
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have named my company Purple Monster Corals if we couldn't, support, demand for it. Again, and I'm not trying to, manipulate markets by throttling it back. It's just a slow growing coral, and it's really hard to find. I haven't seen it in person in 7 years. And the last one we did, the area where we went. So in 2015, Jake wrote an article about us coming out here. We had gone to one side of Central Province to collect deep water chalice, mud-loving corals, and then 4 days into a better part of a 2-week trip, like, goal achieved. We saw what we needed to see, we collected what we needed to see, and it's like, well, we've got a week and a half. What do you want to do, dude? And so, I had heard on a rumor where Purple Monster was originally located, and so, hit the phone book, hit connections, and sort of found where we thought it was. Went there and saw it, and we actually saw it right when we got there. It was snorkeling. It wasn't like we spent 3 days trying to find it. We saw it right when we got off the boat, and it was like, all right, let's have a beer. And that's like, so actually my Facebook profile photo was like 10 minutes after we found it, and it was just like mission achieved, And so sitting on a reef and just basking in success of finding it. And so thinking that we could just go back there anytime, in 2019, Jake was visiting me again. And I was busy doing the logistics and legal aspects of setting this business up still and getting relicensed for the year. And so I was like, go without me and take a lot of photos. And that was when he did the Simons Bay photos in Central Province and found like a bank vault of cool corals. Didn't find Purple Monster there. And he went to the reef where Purple Monster was, and he was skunked. They had a cyclone since between 2015 and 2018. Wow. Cyclone, it wiped out. It was gone. He could not find it, and spent I want to say the better part of a full day, hardcore looking for it, and couldn't find it. So that was a huge loss. But it's around. I mean, the way that we'd always reassure ourselves, like, just because we saw one doesn't mean, millions of years got this coral there. It's not like it's a one of a kind. It just that patch was knocked out.
So what's the story behind who originally collected the Purple Monster? Do you know?
So it was a local collector who just collected off of his front yard, effectively. He's the brother-in-law of the guy who owns the property. But yeah, he's a collector and was sending corals to Dave Palmer in the early 90s. So he's one of the first collectors to be supplying him with fish and corals, or it was probably fish, and then as they got into corals, and it hit, and it through coming into the center, the export center in Honiara under Dave Palmer, under Aquarium Arts. I think they're calling it. I don't think there was Pacific Aquafarms at the time. I think it was Aquarium Arts. Could have been Solomon Sea Stones. It had a couple of different names, but it came in, went to Los Angeles, and Steve Tyree picked it up. Right. And under Tyree, he developed the name. He has all the credit for the naming on that, and then developed the whole system of like waitlisting for a coral, because the demand was insane and it was a slow grower. That he was able to keep the strain alive for so long. It's a finicky coral in captivity. Yeah. So I think like the stuff that we had collected in 2015, I don't know how much is still in captivity from that batch. So it's a finicky coral.
Yeah, the article Jake wrote about it, I think what he said was that I guess you guys went on a mission to find the original Tyree Purple Monster. You found some Purple Monster. I think what he also said was that anything short of like DNA testing would, you can't prove that it is the actual Purple Monster, but damn, man, it looks pretty darn identical to it.
we're sort of beating around the idea of collecting and sending to, now that DNA testing is a lot more reasonable. You know, in 2015, it was like a pie in the sky. Like, what researcher wants to take this on for their, you know, for part of their PhD thing? And now it's like, yeah, it's a laboratory test. Like, we can do this.
Well,
So
dude, if you need help, you know, and you need some DNA from one of my you know, frags or whatnot,
originals.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I've got
awesome.
lineage to, you know, the actual original one that was collected. I have to like go back into my notes, but yeah, that would be a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, I'd get behind that for sure.
So I mean, there's also a lot of other cool classic corals that have been collected in the Solomon Islands. You've got the Miyagi tort, the Kali tort, right?
Yep.
Talk to us about some of those other classics that'll come out of the Solomons.
Yeah, so a lot of what you're going to see is that these are corals that didn't come off the airplane name brand corals, right? They hardened up in captivity and then got their name as like people kept them and they were tradable. So this is back in the day of like, it was a lot less regulated, right? You could just, you know, throw 400 corals on, you know, throw 400 wild corals on. Now your CITES are a lot smaller and expectations are a lot higher. Also, our husbandry is a lot better. So, you know, corals are landing in better shape. Wild corals are landing in better shape than they used to. But I guess what I'm getting at is I haven't seen Kali tort. I've seen like I was with Jake when we collected what he calls immortal tort.
Yeah.
And that's the same texture and same, you know, growth habit. It's not the same color. But what these, you know, it turned way bluer when we collected it. It was a green and brown stag or tort, you know, and it had mutated to a purple or bluer under his captive conditions under LEDs. So it's funny how things change in situ or in captive collection. They harden off and they get used to captive conditions. And, you know, I don't know if it's cooler water because water's warm here. I don't know if it's, you know, any number of things could be different. But once a coral's taken off of its home range and goes into tanks, it changes. But tort we see here, that was actually, mortal tort was collected on the same reef that we collected purple monster on, along with Australogyra zelli, which is just, it's one of those like coral nerds corals, but not a hobbyist. It's not an Instagram famous coral, but it's rare. It's not collected anywhere else in the Solomons. What you know, I'm still sort of a baby company here. I'm still sort of crawling on my knees. We're not up and running, but what I think we'll see over the next couple of years is just new strains coming out, new species coming out, because it's just untouched. You know, where I don't know how many dozens of operators there are in Indonesia, and I know there's more than 15 large operators over Australia with big boats and big operations and multiple divers. Like, we're still in a little ponga, you know, 40 horsepower, 2-stroke ponga boat exploring. You know, we're not up checking, you know, reefs that are 200 miles away yet. But as we get bigger legs, I think you're going to see a lot more. But going to, you know, not going to the sites that were collected throughout the 90s has sort of been what I'm trying to do. You know, going to muddy reefs, going to back reefs, going to places that weren't established coral collecting zones. So we'll see just more species, more strains. Like focusing on deep water, that's been sort of the thrust for the last 3 months. Getting, you know, Locani is starting to become a big thing, and getting different strains of Locani. It means getting comfortable diving for production at 60 to 80 feet. You know, it's not the comfortable snorkeling depth where you can be underwater all day. Like, we have to hit the water and get to work. But yeah, just trying to kind of eke out our own niche. We're not Indonesia and we're not Australia. We're Solomon Islands.
Yeah, it seems like it has been a long time since Locani has been in the hobby, you know, and I guess that has got something to do in terms of what's being collected out there and all that sort of thing. I mean, besides what we've been talking about in terms of Purple Monster and some of the other classics and whatnot, what really resonates with you? I mean, are you more into the deep water stuff? Is there anything that really kind of gets you jazzed?
Fun. Yeah, I mean, shallow's pretty, and it's easy. It's like going and picking wildflowers, right? It's not that hard to just go out and see cool stuff and cover a lot of reef on a couple of tanks. I'm not going under compressor, so I don't have like unlimited time underwater. When we dive deep water for Locani, I mean, I have to sort of be on a mission. And so it's a little more targeted diving. It's a little more stressful, I guess, because you're sort of under, you know, you got to get your numbers, but it's a weird zone. It's very alien. You know, everything's very blue. You get bigger fish. You get sharks. It's more exotic. I think where I enjoy is when we go out where we're staying overnight in a village and you're actually making connections with people, and you're bringing them supplies, you're bringing them concrete and tile and stuff that they need to build their village up as an exchange, and making friends, eating with them, and like actually like going in the bush. Like that's the fun stuff for me. So usually when we collect LPS, that's sort of in the muddy inland passes.
Yeah.
It's oceanic still, but it's just inland, and that's the place that I think I enjoy the most collection wise.
What kind of restrictions do you have to deal with in terms of collecting, permitting and all that sort of thing? Is the government over there, make it tough to do what you want to do, or is it
government? I mean, government everywhere makes things tough, right? It's government's job to make sure that like you can't just run roughshod over and just whenever you're commoditizing an animal, they want to make sure you're not just like, oh, more animals and more animals, right? So they put restrictions. Everything falls under CITES, Conventions for International Trade for Dangerous Species, and so that would be the same if it's Indonesia or if it's Australia or if it's the United States, and that paperwork has to link up to all, it's this common language, common numbers. Everyone's agreed on these terms. So that's the umbrella that we have to operate under, and that everyone has to operate under. But in the Solomons, it's specific. So there's a Ministry of Fisheries, and they have their own quotas. They had said no torch coral, and so I can't export torch coral, right? Like, and it felt a little arbitrary to me, and we're talking to them about it. But that's banned not internationally, but it's banned as an export out of the Solomons. They had also picked humilis, which is like a really common shallow water acropora, but they said can't export acropora humilis. Okay, so we don't export that, right? So that's a Solomon specific rule. Solomons, I can collect, where Indonesia, you're restricted to like your zone, wherever your depot is. If you're Bali, you can only collect in and around Bali. You can't go way out and bring corals in and farm stuff from more exotic locales. Solomons, I'm free to go all around the Solomons and pick wildflowers. But you have to make agreements with that village. You have to go into the landowner. And so land ownership rights here are really Byzantine. And like, so you can have one brother owns the land, another brother owns the trees, or like timber rights to the trees, and then their sister owns the rights to all the fruits that come off of this tree. And like, if anybody steps on each other's toes, it'll be the little family feud will go on. So when it comes to reef rights and access to fish and corals, you have to make sure you're talking to the right person, because kind of a funny trick that will get played on you is you go and talk and you find out you're talking to like a cousin or a third relative twice removed, and you'll make a negotiation and you'll exchange money or whatever the agreement is to have access to this land, and then find out that the next week they're like, oh no, that's not actually the right person to negotiate with. You should have found me. And, so there's a funny story of a tuna factory that was built here in Western province. Like Japan came and built a tuna factory, I want to say in the 80s. And 3 times they bought the land. They flat out bought the land, like, many acres for this tuna factory 3 times. And then just said, you know what, we're done. We can't keep buying this land. Just take it. It's your tuna factory. So that can happen. That happens to, these are, large companies with, I'm sure, legal representation and a lot deeper pockets than I'll ever have. And you just have to take time and make sure that you're negotiating with the right person. So yeah, but
what I was going to ask you is that, so you're talking about land rights and all that sort of thing. Are you actually, you have to put in off of a person's land to go dive off a specific part?
So Solomon Islands government gives me the right to export, right? And the right to harvest, right? But that does not mean that I can just go into someone's village and take, or an island and take corals off that island. If I do that, I could have a couple of very angry boys with machetes board my boat and tell me I have to give them a lot of money. And that threat is real.
Wow.
So and every village, and you could have like, this village extends to this palm tree, and then the other guy from the other village says, well, actually my line is here, and if I overcross it, he's gonna want money from me. So you just have to really be smart about respecting people's boundaries. And it could be as small as like a couple houses could be a beachfront, and that's the only area that you negotiate with. So yeah, you go in ahead of time, you negotiate. And so it's what that boils down to is make good relationships with people and respect those relationships long term. There's a lot of kind of short term thinking here, and you have to sort of pave the way for long term. Like, you're going to see me next month, and you're going to see me the month after that, and you're going to see me next year, and also not turning that into like I'm your ATM whenever you need some help. So it's a balancing act. It's a balancing
So a
act.
couple questions from the viewers. John Wright's asking, does Tim grow out the corals and frag them for export? Is that what you do? Is that part of what you do?
I don't. That was intentional. So with I don't know. I don't want to go too into the back door of the business, but I wanted to give villages and farmers a lot of sovereignty and give them ownership of their coral. I mean, they're doing the work, right? I'm just the merchant in that situation. So I'll go out and show them what I want to buy and what I want them to farm, and I'll again go ahead of time and get the rights to collect, right? And probably take a couple, collect a bit for an export, but then show, hey, this is amazing. Next quarter, give me 50 of these, or if you can grow 100 of these a month, I'll buy 100 a month, and you set that up. Soft corals, it's quick to turn around, right? Hard corals are a little bit slower. But when I go there, I don't own the land. Land ownership here, like I said, it's really contentious, and as a non-citizen, it's just never going to happen. I'm never going to be a landowner here, not realistically. So unless I, have a family, in a situation like that, you really have to become a Solomon citizen to have land ownership, and reef front is land ownership.
Wow.
So I leave that to the individual people here. So in Morale Sound, I've got 53 active farmers there. There's 15 in Central Province, and we have a couple in Western Province that we're developing. Different regions, different topography, different types of coral. Morale Sound, Dave Palmer was working with them in the 90s. I mean, they didn't. That's the other one that Jake did videos of coral farming workshop in March of 2019, where we recruited 53 farmers. And again, they didn't need training. They know what to do. They just wanted an assurance that we're not going to set them up and then sort of lay them, lose interest, which had happened when the station stopped exporting, and that was their big fear. So and that place has just incredible topography because you have open ocean, you have swell facing side, you have not swell facing side, you have sheltered reefs, you have back lagoons, you have sort of all the topography there. It's a rad spot.
So are you paying actually these local landowners for every coral that you collect? Are you paying them a certain fee, and they basically have these kind of like little reef coral farms so they're kind of doing the farming themselves?
Yeah, so
and you're cherry picking from their farms.
The way that, well, not cherry, I buy it all.
Buy it all.
They don't understand the world market. Coral is coral. To them, coral is just stone. It's stone's low sea is the local word for it is stone low sea. So stone of the sea. And so a brown coral is a coral. Blue coral is a coral. Red coral is a coral. They don't understand, and they've never seen an aquarium. It's just a pretty foreign concept. So what we do is the unsellable corals, I'll back burner that, and we use that for reef restoration. We use that to, if we have a ship run aground, cool, let's plant some corals on it. We had an oil spill in Rennell. I wasn't set up at that point, but the idea is that I can donate 5,000 corals to that. Over time, we'll have a bank vault of corals that we can sort of go reseed with. Because brown corals do perfectly fine in the ocean. They're not, no one wants to buy them, but they do their job, and they recruit fish back, and they get things going again. But yeah, I'm the marketplace. I established a marketplace with coral, and then I go there and I show them what I want to buy and what I don't want to buy, so they're not wasting their time. But I'm not the actual farmer. I would tell people I'm a coral farmer. I'm more of a coral farm facilitator, but that's just a lot of words. So. Yeah.
And do you have a facility, like a holding facility, where you're taking these corals back to, and then that's where
holding an export facility that I built with my own hands. We built it without power tools. We just didn't have the budget, and to electrify the facility was difficult. So we're laying block and mixing concrete and doing everything we could without power. We actually electrified during COVID. We were able to finally get it electrified, and so then I can come back and do power tools. But for a long time, I was charging batteries. At my house, and then filling my backpack up with batteries, and then walking down to the work site to get as much work as we could done.
Wow, that is pretty incredible. Bert Minshew is asking, what's up there, Bert? Has Tim ever taken temperatures in different areas and/or salinity or pH? So have you done any kind of parameters checks?
Yeah. So we're seeing, is it 26 degrees Celsius pretty much everywhere I've tested, which is what, 81, 82 degrees pretty consistently. Air temperature's up right now, but I'm not seeing my tanks go up. We take water from the ocean and flow through our facility. I'm not seeing temperatures vary. if corals, if we have power outages like we had when I first got back here in May, we had regular 2 hours, 2 times a day, 3-hour power outages. And so during the night, tanks would they would cool off and they'd go down to ambient, which was, I want to say, high 70s. But corals were holding just fine in a couple degree shift every, night and day cycles. They were doing fine too. pH, I haven't tested. I have tested oxygen, and just seeing that it's saturated. I don't have my numbers in front of me. It's a good question. I wasn't prepared for it, so rad. But pH I did with Jake, where we actually what we call the Purple Monster expedition. It was the Triton expedition. Triton funded it, or bought. They bought Jake's airfare. Actually self-funded. I got not because of Triton, but I got bit on that one. That's a story we won't tell publicly. But yeah, I basically worked for 2 weeks for free. But it was adventure. So when we did run Triton samples everywhere we went, and then sent them back to the lab. At the time, there was only the lab in Germany. But basically everything was coming in consistent, rock solid. So the reefs in the muddy areas, because we weren't testing nutrition at the time, it was just trace element saturation. Trace element concentration was the same in open ocean reefs and in settled reefs. And, that was in 2015. The machines are a lot more accurate now. Yeah. It could be different, but for the average reefer, water was the same. And the way that Jake explained it, because he was testing, and when he went to Middle East, he was testing the Red Sea. The way he explained it to me is like oceanic chemistry is the same for all intents and purposes, not scientifically the same, but like for all intents and purposes, it's the same everywhere he's gone. So, but that was years ago. So,
what about bleaching events? You mentioned 81 degrees, Fahrenheit.
Dude, I just for the first time am seeing bleaching here, and for years I'm like, yeah, the Solomons doesn't have bleaching. We don't get bleaching here. Like we get crown of thorn stars. We get horrible earthquakes that lift whole reefs out of the water. That's happened in my time here, but we hadn't seen bleaching. And on a reef that I regularly go to, we had some bleaching, and it was really depressing. It was coupled with crown of thorns too, so it's bleaching and crown of thorns. So yeah, it's a bummer. It exists. I had thought, and this is purely anecdotal, I don't have the take it for what it's worth, right? My anecdotes. I had thought that because it's consistently warm here, that it would be less subject to a warming event, because it's just sort of hardened against it. But I am seeing it here for the first time.
That's a bummer. So it is definitely, you think potentially global warming is impacting the.
Yeah, that's the consensus view. And I have no data to refute that whatsoever.
Yeah, that sucks. Yeah. So talk to us about the you were talking about the Triton samples and whatnot, and on the expedition. But in your holding facility, are there certain parameters that you're trying to stay at? I think us hobbyists are always very keen on trying to keep a certain DKH, like between 8 and 9 DKH, and elevated pH, and some elevated nutrients, not zeroed out. What what are your thoughts on all that stuff? What are you trying to maintain in your facility there, and what's been successful?
I think you're really not going to like my answer, and that's that I don't have to test. Where I had after years and years and years of maintaining aquariums for demanding and fancy people, I was really excited to be able to offset that responsibility to God, right? To the ocean takes care of my chemistry, the ocean takes care of my electricity bill with my lighting, the ocean takes care of flow. All of those things were sort of just baked in. So the honest truth is, I haven't had to test. I don't even have a alkalinity tester here. I had a par meter. I took that back home before COVID. I just haven't needed it. And I'd like to give you a better answer, because I don't think that's the way it should be. But in bootstrapping this, I have a lot of hats, and I'm chasing the airlines to make sure that cargo's lined up. I've crew I'm chasing. I have to get my boat crew ready. I have government negotiations. So testing, I just haven't been able to do it. And I've been able to assume that that's being taken care of. Now, there are days like where we're at, there's lumber yards just upstream from me. And so when they're doing big saws, or when they're throwing all their sawdust in the ocean, because they do that here, it'll stain the water, which is definitely putting, phytotoxins into the water. And so we stop pumping then. Also, there's the country's, basically the country's national brewery. I should be wearing my Sawbrew hat right now, but Sawbrew, it's a Heineken clone. They actually had a Heineken brewer come out and set it up. But they discharge right. Luckily, they're downstream. But occasionally, we can smell all the yeast that they're discharging. And yeast is not toxic, but it is a lot of biomass, and so that gets dumped. And so we have to cut our flow then and make sure that we're good there.
Wow.
So the location's not ideal where we are. It's just the best I could work with my budget and with a location in town. If I could get more remote, trust me, I would. So, yeah. Yeah. But so the farms are nowhere near here. So where the farms are growing, it's nowhere in the vicinity of town. So in town, it's, you've got all this urban runoff and I like the word heterogeneous. So waste that's generated on land flowing out to sea. So yeah, it's kind of the worst place for corals. It's interesting because in the bays where you have people every day loading and unloading and throwing their trash out of the boats and just really being disrespectful to the ocean, and all these big diesel engines, and a lot of them are running like they're not even diesel, they're like, it's like fuel oil. It's really harsh, nasty stuff where the exhaust is pumped through the boat engine and it's discharging saltwatery exhaust stuff. Oil slicks on the water. You'll still see corals fighting for life even in those areas. So in town, in the right off the market, you'll see corals. So yeah, they fight hard here to eke out an existence, but all of our coral farms are way outside of this area. So their biggest threat is logging and sedimentation from logging. That's the biggest threat to the farms.
Wow, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of challenges, but I mean, so on average, how long are the corals that you're holding in your facility?
I've done 3 weeks and I didn't like it. I don't want to hold more than a week to
Okay, that makes sense, then.
12 days is like, all right, it's been too long. Done longer. Here's one that I was actually a disagreement I had with Jake, was setting up.
That happens,
Oh yeah, no, I mean, friends of the guy, you kind of, yeah. There's some famous ones, yeah. But originally, I had a tin roof, like a corrugated tin, it's steel, but corrugated steel roof, we call it tin. And I thought, well, these corals are starving. They need something. And to some degree, you want to purge corals, like you want to purge fish before export. You want to make sure that their digestive systems are not full of, stuff they're going to poop in the bag. So you want to purge them a little bit, but you don't want to purge them for 12 days. They're hungry and they need sugar. They need sugar to fight off infections and to just stay alive and to stay whole. And so I replaced every couple of roofing tins with fiberglass, and that made a huge difference in color retention and in just overall happiness with the corals. So yeah, that was one thing that we learned, and that I learned, went against the instructions I had from somebody that I think, I miss him. I miss him so much. But I think even in his short years, I'm not 41 yet. I will be soon. I think when I'm 42, he will still have known more than me. And when I'm 52, he will still have more knowledge accrued than I ever will.
Oh, yeah. So. He was like an encyclopedia and just such a resource for sure. Let's get back to specific corals again, Tim. Like Millies, Millipora are very common, right, in the Solomons. And okay.
In the areas that I'm collecting, so the west end of Guadalcanal, the west end of the city, basically of town, is so you have the like Guadalcanal shape. I wish I had like a map to show you, but Guadalcanal is kind of shaped like a bean, and we're sort of in the convex sort of little in the middle of that bean. So the west end of it is getting swell. So 9 months out of the year, you're getting swell coming from relatively open ocean coming over what's called the Iron Bottom Sound. Called the Iron Bottom Sound because there's so many naval boats in the water. This is the site of the worst defeat in U.S. history. We're standing defeat in U.S. history of so many boats, so many soldiers, so many everything. So it's a pretty famous location. And so water's coming over that sound and washing onto this coast, sort of flat on. So it's a high energy, high light, clean, relatively clean water. Not oceanic water, so you're not getting like tabling acropora type water, but clean ocean water hitting it. And so yeah, it's ideal conditions for Millipora. So it's a lot of food. It's hungry. But it's clear water.
I was going to say, so Millies seem to be one of the more challenging acros to keep in captive reef aquariums. Why do you think that is the case? In terms of what you've seen out there as a food.
They're hungry. Yeah. So they don't just want a lot of light. They want a lot of light, but they want a lot of food. Everywhere where I see it, it's shallow snorkeling depth. I've seen it deeper, but it's scraggly. It gets it's just not getting enough energy. So even on the reef where I'm collecting Locani at 60, I'll see an occasional Millie, but they're nowhere near as happy as they are when they're in shallow, snorkeling depth at the risk of almost getting overheated bleaching, they're always right up in that sort of that zone where it's shallow and they're getting a lot of energy, and a lot of wave, not wave breaking, where you're seeing robusta, but a lot of wave energy. So just that's food delivery. You got to think of that as like the more current washing over an area is more opportunities for them to snag food and to snag what they need. So yeah,
So
high light, high energy.
So all right, so I guess what I'm hearing, your advice to hobbyists would be probably higher par, some good flow, and
high oxygen. Yeah. Make sure your oxygen saturation is really good. That was actually the reason why I brought an oxygen test kit here, was to make sure that during transit and when they're like basically, what am I starting off with? I'm starting off with a lot of oxygen enriched water, so that when they get to the United States, are they in the same captive conditions? And so we had to make sure that we were really agitating the water in the holding systems. They weren't sitting in, we were holding them in really big single systems that I feel it's been long enough, but I feel they weren't turned over enough per hour. The oxygen concentration was just too low. So
what about the the proper IDing of corals? And the reason I'm asking is because you've got Meliopora, you've got Spatulata, you've got other varieties of corals that actually Prostrata that look like Millies. How do they differ? I know that Spatulata can be really, really tough to keep. And Prostrata, I think years ago you saw lots of them in the hobby, but again, today I don't see that many, but that's because of a lot of the fancy names, or is it because they're not getting ID'd properly?
I think they're all, there's a lot, right? So there's a lot to unpack. IDing, so IDing has a problem because whatever I declare it as, it has to be that, right? So if I declare something is Prostrata, and then I have some Milliporas and some Prostratas going to shipment, well, now they can start to try to parse that and be like, oh, well, you misidentified this coral species. And so it's safer just to say Millie. And that's true, I think, for every exporter in every corner of the world. It's tough to parse out. Also, a mature colony, you'll see the differences in a mature colony versus a fragment versus a pizza slice of a colony, right? Because you're looking through the side, right. You're not looking at its overall shape, right? So it's coupled with just the realities of doing export and IDing for export, right? Coupled with, it's just tough to tell. Prostrata, the difference between a Prostrata and a Millipora is really sort of a subjective. Without putting the two together, it's really hard. You can't just look at it and be like, that's Prostrata. I think Spatulata is a lot easier. It's more robust. It's denser, or it's squatter. But it's hard. You also have different flow conditions can completely change coral. So if we're just qualitatively and color, forget color, like that's a non-identifier. But if you're looking at, okay, one is denser, well, under shallower water, higher energy conditions, it has to sort of reinforce its skeleton to resist that, and so it's going to be squatter. High light, it's not reaching like a weed would reach for light. Under high light conditions, it's not reaching. So under high light, high flow conditions, it's going to be stubbier. Whereas, like, does that make it a Spatulata? No, but it's going to have a similar shape. So coral IDing is really hard. There was a time in my life where I was really going deep in the weeds on coral identification, and I've had to sort of take how much energy can I throw at this, right? So I ID things as best I can, and as best as I with good intentions can. But man, it's difficult to really parse the difference. Again, Spatulata I think is easy, but Prostrata from Millipora, and even just a few weeks ago, corals that I had shipped, one of my customers was saying like, oh, well, I think that was a Prostrata, and it's like, well, let's document it so that I can sort of cement that in my brain, sort of burn it into my memory, so we don't ever overlap them. But we do the best we can. Yeah. But when you've got, so the Solomon Islands has 500 different species of corals. It's the top coral. So this, I think, is second only to Raja Ampat in Indonesia. But as a whole, I mean, that's one little area of Indonesia. Like, as a whole, Solomon Islands has something like 500 species. So to try to get all those species scientifically accurate, like where, I'm signing my name to it, that's a big bowl of spaghetti.
Yeah. It's a big problem, because like you said, you're exporting corals, and somebody on the receiving end is like, well, maybe that looks like Prostrata versus a Millie, and then then it's going from that person to another person, and they're like, oh, that's a Millie, and then it's going to a hobbyist.
I think that I need to bring up that there's a lot of obfuscation that goes on. So I mean, I'm not talking to retail customers. I'm that's my customer's domain, right? And they would really resent me if I was. You know, like I can give them advice, but I can't like, oh, I'll ship you one of these. They'd never want to buy from me again, right? So you have to kind of respect where we are in the food chain. But I feel like obfuscation at some levels of not even the people that I'm working with, but the people that they're selling to, they don't want people to know where it came from. They want to say, oh, well, it's, you know, I say Tim Kelley's, it's Keith's special orange millipora that only comes from me. When like, you know, you look at some of these Indonesia shipments and named corals are coming off, and then each retail store is calling them their own strain of something right out of the water, right out of the box, and then they're cutting it up, and they're not even keeping brood colonies because they know next week they're going to get 5 more. So it's been a bone to pick. It was a bone, and I don't want to keep bringing Jake up, but it was a bone that me and him would pick a lot, just sort of wax like, you know what really gets under, you know, grinds my gears is the going away from scientific coral naming, or at least getting the domain of the scientific name, right? So like I know it's go back to Millipora prostrata spatulata complex, right? And just saying it's the blue dragon scale. Well, come on, blue dragon scale doesn't tell you anything, or you know, any number of names, just combine or slap rainbow on it and it'll sell. It's really unfortunate. It's something that like I wish people in the coral hobby were more like reptile enthusiasts, where like this boa constrictor is really special because it comes from this island and it's only ever been collected once, and that's not something that's lost intentionally. I feel like geolocation is really lost intentionally, and it's something that if I could, I would do everything I can to bring that back and sort of geotag where we're collecting corals, or where the broodstock was originally collected, so that if someone wants to go find it, like cool, go find it. You know, like that connects you to the hobby. If I can continue my little rant.
Yeah, go for it, man.
Early on, when I was a buyer, when I was you know, working at a fish, I was working at Mark's Tropical Fish in Los Angeles, in Valley Village. And he was the first guy that would take me to wholesalers. So I want to say it was Mondays, I'd have to meet him at his house at 6 o'clock, and we would go down to 104th Street and go shop. And I remember on the wall at Quality Marine, they had a like fish of Vanuatu, and I don't think it was corals, but it's fish of Vanuatu. And I remember just thinking like, how cool would it be to build an ecotope that's like just Vanuatu? So like, if you and your wife were into diving and you were ever to go to Vanuatu, you could be like, you could have a slice of that back. You could buy fish from that area, or you know, now I'm a coral exporter, like buy fish and coral from that area and have a little slice of your honeymoon or a slice of a fun vacation you took. I don't feel like that's important to most people. They just want, you know, sort of like you see that collectoritis of like, I want one of every name brand coral. And you're putting them too close together, and they're not thinking about how these corals are going to grow up in the next couple of years, because you know, each coral wants to be, you know, on a 12 by 12 inch space, and they're just clumping all these, you know, chaos of coral shapes and colors together. So yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of a few comments in the chat here about stability and how important it is in the hobby, and you know, a lot of us try to, you know, keep stable tanks in terms of parameters, alkalinity, and temperature and all that stuff. You know, given what you're seeing out there in the field and the Solomons, how important do you think stability should be for us hobbyists? Is that something that you know, is
absolutely 100% critical? I feel that like this is more going to my experience as a coral aquarium service guy, as a you know, reef focused aquarium service guy. Even if your parameters are a little bit off, like imperfect, you know, your salinity is a little off, your pH is a little off, if you're consistent, you're going to be fine. And then if you're off, when you make improvements, if you very quickly, let's say your pH was low, your alkalinity was low for a long time, your corals have adapted to it. If you rapidly bring your alkalinity back up to your ideal window, if for 3 months or 4 months it's been low, if you overnight change it, you're going to shock your corals, and they're going to bail out. They're going to be like, I'm out. You know, let some young planula take my spot. You know, corals don't like rapid changes. They would rather deal with consistently bad conditions than to deal with varying ideal, unideal, ideal, unideal, ideal, unideal conditions. That's how you get dead corals. Yeah, there's more tenacious corals, and I think that's where your captive hardened corals, you know, stuff like look at the corals that ORA puts out. They're awesome. They're consistent. They like a wide range of corals. They like being in captivity because they've been aquarium, you know, they've been hardened. So Yeah, I always liked what they do because they again, going back to like when I worked at Vivid, I thought that like in 15 years, and it's been more than 15 years, but in 15 years, it's going to be like, cause my first job was working at a nursery, at a plant nursery. It's going to be like when you go buy a 6-pack of annual flowers and there's a little tag and it gives you your basic conditions that somebody who doesn't even know corals can just sit within these conditions and the corals will be okay. Again, like buying, cheapy disposable flowers at the, or perennials, but like flowers at a nursery, it's been figured out.
Hey, what's happening there? Amanda Mickley is in the house there.
Oh, great.
Sturgis Reef. So I feel like the only thing that doesn't correspond with stability in the wild is temperature, yet in the aquarium it seems much more important.
Oh no, stability here is insane. You get almost no water temperature variation throughout the entire year. I mean, the sun. So because we're in the tropics, the sun goes up at 6 o'clock and it goes down at 6 o'clock every day throughout the year. It might be 6:05 or 6:10 on the extreme end, but like coming from Los Angeles, I used to love summers because the sun doesn't go down until 8 at night, right? Like you get 2 extra hours of daylight, which is 2 more hours of warming, which
Yep.
is warmer sea temperatures. You don't have seasonal variations here at all. I mean, to scientifically, you do get some seasonal variations, but it's almost imperceptible. It's less than a degree. So yeah, the conditions here are extremely within every parameter: temperature, chemistry, everything.
What about day-night swings? I mean, high, low, temp, average. What would you say?
So air temperature will change. Air temperature change. I mean, I even noticed that I'm about. I'm starting to. I'm moving away from freedom units. I'm a bad American. I was going to say I'm 1 kilometer inland. So I noticed an air temperature change being away from the ocean. I get more inland variation. I'm also about. I don't know how much you can see, but like, the webcam's not gonna show. But I'm probably, probably 600 feet above sea level, or 500 feet above sea level. So we get a little more seasonal, but on the water, like most people here live really close to the coast. It's consistent. Air temperature is even pretty darn consistent. You occasionally get a breeze if something's coming down a valley from the mountains, and we have mountains here. We have. I tried to climb Mount Manuseu about 3 months back. We got turned around because of like crazy flooding. It was going to be a 7-day trip up into the bush, or we were thinking it was going to be 5. We found out later it was going to be 7, and we were way in over our heads. But yeah, but it got cold. I mean, it's at that point when you get up there, it's cloud forest, and that was what I was really excited to go see. But you get variations there when you get altitude, but on the water, tropical coastal rainforest, it's locked in. It's solid.
So let's assume that you're a hobbyist right now. Okay, you got a reef tank. You're living in the States. What would you do in terms of feeding your corals, amino acids, specific coral food? Would you bother, or you just rely on fish food and fish poop?
Yeah, no, I do. I had, so during COVID, I was essentially a COVID refugee. I was stuck in the States, yeah, and I maintained a reef tank that I was really proud of. Again, I wish I could show you, throw some media your way, yeah. But if we had a B-reel, if we were pre-recording this, yeah. But I used was it Red Sea AB Plus, the like highlighter colored fluid. I would use that. I'd started to get into hydrogen peroxide, a little bit of hydrogen peroxide. And then I became a Kalk guy, dosing every day.
Why the hydrogen peroxide?
I was starting to see, once I increased nutrients, I was starting to see some algae, and it's just a little inhibitor of algae, and then you're left with just water at the end of it, oxygen and water. So there's no byproduct. You're not leaving anything behind in the ocean. So I would just do a little maintenance dose of hydrogen peroxide every day. And Kalkwasser for pH stability. The house I lived in was buttoned up tight. It was really efficient, which is great, but air turnover was bad. And even though I was remoting the intake for the protein skimmer, I was fighting pH swings. We were using Triton, and Triton does have agents in it to maintain your pH. But in this really buttoned up condition, a lot of them were taking their protein skimmer intake from outside. I couldn't drill through enough walls to make that a reality. So I overcame it by using a little bit of Kalkwasser every day. Yeah. So so between the food, but with the increased nutrition, I was having some algae, and so yeah, it's everything's a balancing act. I tell people with reef keeping, it's not just a seesaw of 2 different points. It's like an 8-pointed seesaw that you're constantly, if you do anything here, it's going to push these up, and you're always kind of tapping them down.
It is a fine balance when you're keeping a captive reef aquarium. It's interesting you mentioned the hydrogen peroxide, because I've been fighting a little cyano here and there for a while, and somebody said, you know what, try some hydrogen peroxide. Dose that daily for like a week and see what happens.
Yeah, you'll get a response. It means non-corals love it. I would see my palithoas would just like zoof. Instantly they could sense it. So they didn't like it at all. But, I wasn't having a problem keeping palithoas. I was more worried about, what was it? It's been now months, but it was overgrowing. I think it was cyano. I think it was cyano was showing up, or it might have just been a green fuzzy algae. But yeah, it definitely knocked it back. It knocked it back big time.
So we're getting a question from Ryan Washington. How much hydrogen peroxide? How much hydrogen peroxide? How many mLs per gallons there would you say, Tim?
Oh, I'm not the person to. I just Google food it, to be honest. And then also went really conservative. Hydrogen peroxide is, chemically it's bleach, right? It behaves very similarly to bleach. So it's really active stuff. Yeah. So you come in at a really low dose and then see how your tank responds, like at a quarter of the recommended dose. Come in light, and then the next day increase it a little bit, and the next day increase a little bit with measured, document it and see what your corals can handle. Don't just, because it's a really strong oxidizer. Like, so it's making the comparison to bleach. So it will burn things, and burning things is what it's doing. It's burning algae. It's burning stuff off of fish gills. It's burning stuff. It's just your bigger, more complicated organisms can handle it. They've got layers of tissue and layers of mucus that can handle that oxidizer. Whereas the nasty stuff, the simpler organisms don't. And so their ability, it's kind of like reef, what's that, chemotherapy, like cancer cells can't handle the chemicals. So I'm the wrong guy to give advice. I think it's the safest answer I can say. I think was it, oh man. I haven't. Yeah.
I was going to say, somebody in the chat said, I've always heard 1 ml per 10 gallons. Somebody is concurring with that. I was told 1 ml per gallon by somebody that I'm going to have on in a couple of weeks.
That's a swing of 10x.
Yeah, it's a big swing.
That's a swing of 10x.
This guy I'm going to have on in a couple of weeks. I've had him on many times. He's a PhD. His name's Dong Zhou, and he can grow the shit out of acros. So we'll dig into that with him in terms of that recommendation. But yeah, I've used it, hydrogen peroxide, to like treat frag plugs or whatnot. And I think at one point in time when I had some dinos, I tried doing that. What about what are your thoughts on dosing bacteria, to an established reef tank? Is that something that's necessary?
I would say, okay, so I think the safe answer is it's not necessary, because I've had success without doing it. Would I have more success? It's possible. I haven't done it, so I'm not speaking from experience there. I know that if you're on a reef, you're getting exposed to seasonal variations of bacteria. You're going to have blooms. You're going to have cycles, right? When you have a closed system, especially if you've had a really successful closed system, you're not buying coral and you're not importing live rock and you're not adding new variations to a system. It can become stagnant. It can become sort of a monoculture of your microfauna. So I would imagine if you're supplementing it, you're only doing a good thing, right? If it's again, you're not, it's they say, like, I want to make a crass example, but like if you go around kissing people, you're gonna get the flu, right? You're gonna expose yourself to too much, yeah. But like if it's stagnant, if the microfauna is stagnant, I imagine that you can have winners and losers, and you want more of a variety. I imagine corals want more of a variety. So if you're inputting bacteria, it's coming from a lab, it's coming from a company that knows exactly what they're giving you. They're not giving you gnarly strains. It's like when we worked at wholesale or at import, we would get a lot of problems because you're importing corals from Indonesia, corals from Africa, or corals from, even corals from Africa, but like zoanthids, corals from Indonesia and Australia. So basically every end of the world, like, you're getting animals from, right? And so you're getting bacteria, and you're getting parasites as well. You're getting nasty stuff. So it's a big difference between just throwing new stuff at a reef versus like a targeted bacteria for the microfauna for your reef. So I think it's a really exciting new field where they're only now in the last 5 years in a place where they can test microbiomes. Yeah. So that's bleeding edge. That's really cool stuff. I haven't had the experience. The last 5 years, I've kind of been on an island. So,
what,
that's where I'm at.
So yeah, I mean, if you run into episodes of RTN or STN, what's your kind of first step? Large water changes, or do you actually use some antibiotics?
Large water change first thing. Antibiotics, we're playing with antibiotics right now. So we had an issue with actually our milliporas, where when they were landing, they were having issues of our tanning, and it was a really frustrating thing. And we found that baths of antibiotics were knocking that down. Again, that's the receiving side. I'm the exporter now, so like I don't even know what the exact cocktail was. But the guys that we're shipping to now have that figured out. But for a while, that was a problem. We were having RTN. It was sort of becoming sort of a little dark cloud over the millipores we're shipping. The hyacinthus wouldn't do it. All the other strains would do it, but the milliporas were having some RTNing, which was really disappointing. But yeah, it's a problem of the past now. So, for me,
go ahead.
For me, cutting off the receiving tissue quickly, not letting it linger because it will take the entire coral with it. Clean water, not letting it sit in bacteriolating old stagnant water. It would be like, I always say, like if you go to the dentist and you have a cavity, they have to irrigate it. They have to sort of get oxygen in there and clean that infection out of there. So, yeah.
What about, you mentioned parasites, aqua-eating flatworms, Monte-eating nudibranchs. How do you handle those sorts of things when you do see them come on a coral?
So Monte-eating nudibranch hasn't been a thing on this in this part of my career. We haven't seen it here. When I was in captive, like greenhouse growing, I worked for a service company out of Malibu. I almost wore my Dock Aquarium tank top today, but from Malibu. But we dealt with Monte nudibranch by basically hiring a full-time guy to clean, pick, trim, dip, to knock it out of the warehouse. So we had our own strain of grafted Monte cap that we were really proud of. And it was basically simultaneous with Worldwide Corals developing their strain. And it was one of the first like captive grafted corals. And so we were protecting, it was gold, so hiring a full-time staff to take care of that, it warranted it to, keep that safe. Nowadays, I don't know, maybe nowadays with cap, I would just throw it out because it grows back so fast and so many people have it. It's not what it was 12, 14 years ago. But we do see aquapora flatworms here, and that's potassium chloride. Potassium chloride? Potassium.
Yeah, potassium chloride is a great.
Knocks that off.
Yeah. Obviously, it's the eggs that are the main problem, and it's so tough. If you do see the aqua-eating flatworms, you're likely you do have the eggs, and it's I guess you got to try to do your best to trim the top of get the base. Go ahead.
It's a funny thing. Like, so again, you have to sort of understand where you're at in the food chain. You never want to knowingly pass down a sick animal, right? Yeah. But if you're a lettuce farmer, do you have the realistic time to sit there and flip every lettuce over and look for, in an ideal world you would, but we don't live in a perfect place where you can sit and look at everything. So we look at our corals, but I don't have the staff, I don't have the budget for the staff that can do that, right? We look for blue-eyed crabs, so we're not kicking that problem down the road. We look for parasites as best we can. I would love to get to the point where I have a full-time staff to just go over every coral. But it's just, you're adding cost, which then, so let's just assign an arbitrary value. If I have a $10 coral and I add $2 of labor into it, well, now the person that buys it, they have to double that, right? Yeah. So now on the import side, they're doubling that and then adding on airfare. And then when they sell it, that's got to get doubled again, right? So now my inputting $2 of fix is now like a $45 step, right? Which could probably be better done with more patience and more attention to detail at a smaller scale at the retail or at the wholesale side, rather than doing it at the export side. So it's really like how long do I want the coral sitting in the facility before it's moved on? And it's a balance. I mean, I've gotten advice that like, screw them, it's the customer's problem, and like, it doesn't sit right. That doesn't sit right. But also, how much you're going to charge the customer for that fix, because you're adding, at basically at my level, you're counting pennies. You're counting what your penny additions into these prices are. And I'm getting beat up over prices. Like, if I add 25 cents to a price, like I'm getting I'm hearing about it. So,
So what are your thoughts about natural predators in terms of pests? I see Bert Minshew said, I heard a herd of 6-line wrasses will keep the doctor away. What about, wrasses and even peppermint shrimp have been known to be pretty good.
Yep. Absolutely. No, both of those are fantastic at keeping populations of prey of parasites down. That's their job, right? I can't realistically keep them in my holding systems. I mean, one 6-line wrasse would within the first year decide that the holding system is his or hers and kill every other 6-line. Yeah, they're pretty damn territorial. Yeah. We have those. We have possum wrasses here that I see on dives, but yeah. So in a captive tank, I was like, what are those? They're green, red on their face. It has been. I am so out of the loop on aquarium keeping. What's the name of that wrasse? They're green. They have some red lines.
Oh,
they're great at coral cleaning.
Yeah, you're talking about Melanius.
Melanurus.
Yeah.
Melanurus wrasse. They're fantastic. Yeah. So that for me, that was always my go-to for keeping my tank clean. But yeah, so for export side, it's just not realistic or practical. But on the coral farms, absolutely. I mean, you look at the fish that are living in and around the tables, and that is small wrasses, and they're using them both for protection and keeping them clean. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, wrasses. I don't see peppermint shrimp. Yeah, I mean, peppermint shrimp are I think they're American. They're New World. I don't even think they're Old World. But we do have like skunk cleaners and things like that. All right, Keith. Here's a warning. I'm getting low battery.
Okay.
Because our outage. So it says 14 minutes. It's rarely accurate. So I might get kicked.
I'm gonna hit you with one more question from a viewer, John Wright. Sure. And this is a good question to wrap it. Tim, where do you see the future in collecting corals from the wild when aquaculture and spawning corals in the hobby is, based on where everything is going in the hobby? What do you think the future holds?
So I would if captive spawning is I don't want to say put me out of business, but changes my business model, that's a good day. If we can spawn coral in captivity, and like, I've cracked a beer or 2 or 3 with Jamie Craggs. Like, I think what he's doing is amazing, right? I've had breakfast with the guy too. I would love to see that expand to where it's regular, where people are in the home spawning, and you have people like Rich Ross who are in home spawning, right? So it's a thing, and it's if you have the if you have the patience and the consistency and the sensors to know everything is within parameters, it's doable. I always think there's a place for new genetics, especially in a place like this that's so unexplored and so uncollected from, and it's really the frontier of coral reefs, at least for the aquarium hobby, or for the dive hobby too. So I think I'll always have a place, but if I'm relegated to niche, new strains of coral, that just means I get to go diving and exploring more, and we pivot. I always want to have a place for coral farmers. This is giving livelihoods to people that have literally no access to cash. They can subsistence farm for food, but to get money to put their kids into school and buy uniforms, things like that, like, I always want to have a place where they're getting money. But yeah, if coral spawning takes off, or in-home coral spawning, or at least it changes the marketplace, I think that's a good thing.
Well, dude, I think you're a very vital, important cog to this reef keeping hobby, this whole ecosystem, and yeah, I think we got to keep the export of corals going strong. So, folks, out there, please let's support this effort in terms of what Tim has accomplished and what you're doing out there, man. Really appreciate your work. And I am looking forward, dude, to seeing some purple monster frag at some point down the line coming back into the aquarium trade.
Yeah, 2024.
That'll be so freaking cool.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Any final thoughts, man, before we sign off?
I think if I had can I finish on a rant?
Yeah, go for it.
Appreciating how difficult it is to get wild corals, to get these new strains of corals into the hobby, that it's not like I every time I dive we find something new. So when people either in Australia or Indonesia or here in the Solomons or in Tonga, and they're finding new things, instead of trying to like obfuscate where it came from, like, I think it should be celebrated that, like, here's a new strain of coral from Australia, or a new fish, or a new, I'd like to see that day where, the species level identification, like, again, like you see in reptiles, when like, this Komodo Island, strain of gecko, and why that's special. So I'd like that to be a thing in coral. And maybe that's just because I think Solomons is cool, and I'd like people to value it because it's Solomons. But yeah, more appreciation for place of origin.
Well, man, listen, I really enjoyed this conversation. Fascinating stuff, and thanks, Tim, for making the time to join us out there. Really awesome, really cool stuff.
Thanks for having me.
So everybody, that's going to do it for the show tonight. I want to give my sincere thanks to Tim for being on the live stream. Also want to thank both Bulk Resupply and Ecotech Marine for sponsoring the show. And thanks to all of you folks out there for tuning in. Big thank you to Paul, who is the moderator as well as the president of the Boston Reefers Society. Please join and support your local reefing clubs. They are so important to this hobby. Also want to let you know that all episodes of Rappin With ReefBum are available as podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Amazon. My next Rappin With ReefBum will be on Tuesday, November 4th. Not November 14th. It's going to be, oh, geez, I got to bring up the calendar. I had the wrong date in my script there, Tim, so I got to look at, I'm back on December 5th. All right, I'm not going to be on next week. I'm back on Thursday, December 5th. And I'm going to be having Mr. Dong Zhou on the program back again, so that should be another great episode. If you want to check out the full upcoming schedule of guests, please visit reefbum.com under the YouTube section. So until next time, be safe and be well. Later.